The Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any time. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on exploring the economic potential of the golden age of American energy dominance. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statement at the hearing are limited to the chairman and the ranking member. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all other members' statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted in accordance with Committee Rule 3.0. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today to discuss and exploring the economic potential of the golden age of American energy dominance. House Committee on Natural Resources Republicans have worked tirelessly to emphasize the importance of revenue generated by multiple uses of our great nation's federal lands and waters. Every year, oil and gas development, grazing, mining, and timber harvesting, and recreation generate billions of dollars for the United States to benefit Americans everywhere. That's the beauty of the multiple use doctrine of the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976, or FLPMA. These dollars fund conservation programs, grow rural economies, pay for infrastructure projects, contribute to balancing state and local budgets, and a key point, they can help reduce the $37 trillion federal deficit. Yet radical environmental groups and the NGOs have ignored this reality and have kicked, screamed, and intimidated their way into covering up the fact that this is not the federal government's job to lock up our public lands from an alleged human impact. Rather, the government must serve as a steward, reasonably and responsibly balancing the multiple use of our public lands. To be clear, the United States is blessed with abundant natural resources. With 1.66 trillion barrels of technically recoverable oil, 4.03 quadrillion cubic feet of technically recoverable natural gas, the world's largest coal reserves, and over 620 million acres of land under federal management, America is well positioned to unleash energy dominance. Doing so will not only help lower energy costs for American families and broadly strengthen the U.S. economy, but also eliminate our nation's reliance on foreign adversaries like China and Russia for energy and mineral resources without which we cannot function. The principle of using our federal lands in multiple ways is well established. The Mineral Leasing Act of 1920, the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, as I spoke earlier, of 1976, and the Federal Lands Recreation Enhancement Act spell out the multiple use mandates important and provide a structure for raising revenues for the United States. This revenue comes from fees, royalties, overhead, permits, and rents. Similarly, my bill, H.R. 34, the Lasso Act, which would create a revenue stream for 10% of the revenue generated from these activities on public lands to be deposited in the Social Security Act. During fiscal year 2023, onshore oil and gas brought in $7.325 billion to the Treasury. Of this amount, $3862 billion went to the states, $7.045 billion went to the Reclamation Fund, and $14.73 million went to the Permitting Process Improvement Fund. During the same 2023 fiscal year, recreational fees collected from public lands brought in $482.3 million, which helped fund facilities, maintenance, habitat restoration, and even had law enforcement activities. In 2024, the United States Forest Service brought in approximately $2.557 million from timber sales in May of 2025. The Bureau of Land Management generated $5.851 million in revenue from a single timber sale in Western Oregon. The money generated on federal lands directly contributes to conserving these same public lands. The generated revenue supports funds to build roads, expand access opportunities, and to ensure the America's flora, fauna, landscapes, and natural resources thrive for all future generations. Beyond conservation, the money generated from the federal land activities like energy development, mining projects, and national park-based popular ski areas, resorts, allow local economies to flourish. These activities create reliable, well-paying jobs that encourage local settlements. Local restaurants and other businesses open and thrive. Accordingly, local and state and federal economies grow as well. In 2021 alone, activities on federal lands contributed more than $194 billion to our nation's GDP. In 2020, oil and gas industry alone provided $12.3 million American jobs and generated $1.6 trillion in federal and state tax revenues. The principle of multiple use of our federal lands must continue to be advanced, and the revenues generated from these uses must continue to grow and serve the American public. As I mentioned earlier, I introduced H.R. 34, the Lasso Act, under which 10% of this revenue generated by the Department of the Interior and Forest Service lands will be deposited in the Social Security Trust Fund's Federal Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund. The Lasso Act would add at least $15 billion into the Social Security Trust Fund over the course of the next decade. In addition to my Lasso Act, Republicans in Congress have championed other legislative proposals that will continue to grow and responsibly use revenue generated from federal lands. For example, the Lower Energy Costs Act, the Superior National Forest Reclamation Act, Alaska's Right to Produce Act of 2023, Mining Regulatory Clarity Act of 2024, and the Builder Act of 2023 would all contribute to unleashing Americans' energy and resource dominance and independence. I look forward to continuing the work with my Republican colleagues in the Trump administration to unleash the golden age of American energy dominance and to ensure that our federal lands continue to raise their revenues that benefit the American people. What better way to have that than to go into the Social Security Fund? Thank you, and I now recognize Ranking Member Dexter for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here with us today. I'm glad that we're here to talk about ensuring that taxpayers are getting a fair return when private companies profit off our public lands. This country has vast natural resources that generate significant revenue for taxpayers, as we just heard. Each of these resources belong to the American people. And that's why it's in every American's best interest and in this congressional responsibility to ensure that every single dollar owed to the public is collected. But we already know that that is simply not happening. Let me first highlight what we already know about the different ways oil and gas companies are taking taxpayers for a ride. For over 14 years, the Department of the Interior, tasked with overseeing one of our country's largest non-tax sources of revenue, has been on the Government Accountability Office's high-risk list, a yearly report that identifies federal programs that are most vulnerable to waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement. The GAO has made over 100 recommendations over 11 years to Interior to help fix this problem. Over a third of these recommendations have not been implemented. The GAO has shown that the Interior is not collecting as much in royalties from oil and gas companies as it's supposed to by a margin of about $100 million every 2 years. If Interior improved its oversight and increased royalty collections by even 1%, they could make big oil get closer to paying what they owe us, to the tune of tens of millions of dollars a year. But Interior hasn't hired the staff needed to verify production reports, making it easy for oil companies to game the system. This is exactly why big oil wants to gut oversight agencies. They make more money when no one is watching. That's why I'm working on legislation to hold these companies accountable by strengthening federal oversight, closing loopholes, and ensuring taxpayers finally get every dollar they are owed. The American people should not be subsidizing corporate polluters while families are struggling to afford housing, health care, and food. On top of that, the Republican Big Ugly Law prioritizes handouts to big oil over working families, making it even harder to ensure a fair return on taxpayer-owned natural resources. And just one example, it slashes the onshore royalty rate for new federal oil and gas leases from the current rate of 16.7% to 12.5%, far below market rate. This will give billions of dollars in revenue to the oil and gas industry at the expense of taxpayers. Experts at Taxpayers for Common Sense estimate that taxpayers lose around $1.5 billion in revenue every year on the leases that are awarded at below market royalty rates. And let's be clear, if Republicans were really concerned about taxpayers, they wouldn't be pushing a bill that adds more than $3 trillion to the deficit, mainly to fund cuts for billionaires and more subsidies for oil CEOs. At the same time, it guts health care and food assistance for kids, seniors, and working families. That is a betrayal of the American people. As a physician, I know firsthand what cuts to Medicaid mean. Patients going without care, crowded emergency rooms, clinics closing, and lives lost, all while big oil gets richer. And those royalties that should be paid to American families that are being cut could offset those costs, but we're cutting those too. My hope today is that we can have a constructive conversation about how to guarantee taxpayers get the fair return that they are owed on our nation's resources. The American people deserve nothing less. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman. Now I'm going to introduce our witnesses. First, we have Ms. Diana Forgot-Roth. Did I say it right? From Director of Heritage Foundation, Center for Energy, Climate, and Environment, Washington, D.C. Then we have Mr. Jerry Taylor, Commissioner, Garfield County, Panguitch, Utah, someplace I always go through on the way back to Wyoming. Ms. Autumn Hanna, Vice President, Taxpayers for Common Sense, Washington, D.C., and Mr. Dustin Myers, Senior Vice President of Policy, Economics, and Regulatory Affairs, American Petroleum Institute, Washington, D.C. Let me remind you, the witnesses, that under committee rules, you must limit your statements to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will be entered into the record. To begin your testimony, we have an on light, which is green. Once it turns yellow, start slowing down, and when it hits red, stop, okay? It's just that simple. Now I'm going to recognize Ms. Forgot-Roth for her 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Goza, Ranking Member Dexter. Thank you very much for allowing me to testify. Energy dominance should not be a partisan issue. Everyone wants Americans to have reliable, secure, and affordable energy. Who wants the American electricity grid to look like South Africa, or wants American industry to look like Germany? American energy policy dominance goals should be to remain energy independent using domestic sources of energy which are affordable and abundant, which means oil, gas, coal, and nuclear power, to foster this energy both domestically and among our allies, and to prevent other countries from weakening our energy access, whether China and its green energy industry or the EU and the environmental regulations it wants to impose on America. The Biden administration created a dangerous energy situation, so damaging to people that it required immediate action. When Chancellor Angela Merkel decided to make Germany dependent on Russian gas, and the gas went away, Germany became dependent on coal and nuclear power from other countries. If America were to become dependent on green energy, and China decided to cut off supplies of solar panels, batteries, and wind turbines, America would be in trouble. No solar panels or wind turbines, no fossil fuels. Fortunately, President Trump declared a national energy emergency, ending restrictions on energy production, doing away with electric vehicle mandates, ending incentives for renewable energy, and canceling President Biden's natural gas export ban. This 180-degree turn will give America leverage among energy-starved regions, which will be able to purchase natural gas from Uncle Sam. President Trump supports loans for fossil fuel plants in emerging economies, now penalized by the World Bank and other international organizations. This benefits the 3 billion people without electricity or running water. Trump's energy policy may do more to lift people permanently out of poverty than any aid program tried before. Without reliable electricity that could be used for a manufacturing base, African migrants without jobs and electricity stream to Europe, and Latin American migrants stream to North America. The UN's Net Zero Banking Alliance, a group of 140 banks that pledged not to lend for fossil fuel projects in emerging economies, suspended operations last month after multiple departures. It's modern European colonialism that prevents emerging economies from developing their own fossil fuels to improve lives and industrialize. This is forcing countries that have never carbonized to decarbonize their people into permanent energy poverty. Net zero is hurting Europe by raising electricity prices and shrinking its manufacturing sector. Germany used to be renowned for industry, but German industry saw a 4.5% fall in production in 2024, the 4th year running, with no expected uptick in 2025. German workers are losing their jobs, and in May, the entire Spanish grid blacked out. Net zero maximizes misery, and because Europe wants shared pain, it doesn't want America to have a competitive advantage, so it's exporting energy scarcity policies to America, just as states with high minimum wage laws want federal minimum wage laws to be raised. the EU's Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, with the acronym CSDDD, is set to impose draconian environmental restrictions on global operations, including American operations of major companies operating in Europe. Companies with more than 500 million in revenues will have to declare their worldwide global emissions, the emissions of their contractors, and the emissions of their contractors' contractors beginning in 2029, including their activities in the United States. It's easy to make a mistake and get hit with financial penalties. Not only is the EU setting the rules, but Europeans are charging Americans for costly software to monitor complex compliance. This is another aspect of energy colonialism, and it undermines American sovereignty. If Europe succeeds, Americans will pay more for energy and everything it powers. Almost 250 years ago, America declared independence from Britain, my former home country. We can't allow Europe to dictate American energy policy or to reimpose rules from which we declared independence back in 1776. American companies fly under our flag, not under the flag of the EU. We mustn't let Europeans enslave America the way they enslaved people in other continents, especially since it's for no climate gain. Even if America and Europe stopped using all fossil fuels today, this would only reduce global temperatures in 2100 by less than 1/2 degree centigrade. Thanks to President Trump's energy dominance agenda, we'll have lower energy prices, we won't become dependent on China, and we don't have to give up 250 years of independence to Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Roth. Now the chair recognizes Mr. Taylor for his 5 minutes.
Chairman Gozar, Ranking Member Dexter, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of Garfield County, Utah, and the National Association of Counties. My name is Jerry Taylor, and I serve as a Garfield County Commissioner, and I've done so for 8 years. And prior to that, I was a mayor of Escalante for 7 years. And I also serve as the NACO's Public Lands Policy Steering Committee Chair. Garfield County is a place where federal land policy isn't an abstract debate, it's a daily life. Over 90% of the land is federally managed in Garfield County. Yet despite our vast size, larger than the state of Connecticut, we are home to 5,200 residents. Our county is responsible for maintaining roads, providing law enforcement, conducting search and rescue, and delivering emergency services across the immense landscape. NACO represents 3,069 counties nationwide, from rural counties like mine to the largest metropolitan areas. Counties are on the front lines of service delivery. We make federal lands accessible, safe, and sustainable for residents and visitors alike. Garfield County illustrates both the promise and the pressure of federal land management. We are home to Bryce Canyon, Capitol Reef, and Canyonlands National Parks. Also the home of the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, which is almost 2 million acres. We're also home to Dixie National Forest and 3 state parks and the Glen Canyon National Recreation Area. These spectacular places attract millions of visitors, driving our local economy, but they also strain our deputies, EMTs, and road crews. We must respond to rising emergencies with limited budgets. Energy, grazing, forestry, and recreation are equally vital. In 2024, Garfield produced more than 93,000 barrels of oil, while the Caparowitz Plateau holds some of Utah's largest untapped coal reserves. Responsible access to these resources generates jobs, supports schools, and funds public safety. Grazing sustains multi-generation ranches, reduces wildfires, and strengthens our rural economy. Active management on the Dixie National Forest helps reduce wildfire risk and protect watersheds. This is what we mean by multiple use. When managed responsibly, these activities complement one another and put conservation into practice. But counties face persistent challenges. Restricted access to leasing or project areas means lost jobs and revenue. A heavy influx of visitors bring costs we can't meet without federal help. Lengthy permitting processes add delays and drive up costs. In a county with a short construction season, losing a window to permitting can mean an entire year of delay. Too often, the counties lack a seat at the table during federal reviews, even though our local requirements for zoning, roads, and emergency planning directly affect those projects. Counties are not just stakeholders, we are essential partners. When a wildfire breaks out, when a hiker goes missing, or when a road washes out, county responders are the first on the ground. Local knowledge and accountability are critical to making federal lands work for the nation. That's why we urge Congress to take several steps. Streamline federal permitting with clear timelines and accountability. Protect PILT and other revenue sharing programs so counties can fund essential services that protect both our residents and visitors. Formalize county input in land use plannings so local expertise shapes decisions. Affirm multiple use as the foundation of a sound stewardship, recognizing that energy, grazing, forestry, and recreation can fit together. In short, a durable path to American energy leadership must respect multiple use, value local expertise, and strengthen the federal-county partnership. Chairman Gozar, Ranking Member Dexter, and members of the committee, Garfield County represents both the opportunities and challenges of America's public lands. With balanced policies, we can deliver both economic strength and have conservation results. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. The chair now recognizes Ms. Hannah for her 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gosar, Ranking Member Dexter, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Autumn Hanna, and I am Vice President of Taxpayers for Common Sense, a national nonpartisan budget watchdog. For 3 decades, TCS has worked to ensure federal resources are managed responsibly, taxpayer dollars are spent wisely, and today's decisions don't create costly liabilities for future generations. The backdrop of today's hearing is the administration's call for expanded production to unleash a golden age of American energy. As this committee knows, America has abundant reserves of energy resources, including oil, gas, and coal. The United States has already been producing and exporting energy at record levels. Since 2019, the U.S. has produced more energy than it consumes, making us one of the world's leading energy suppliers. The challenge before us is to ensure record high production is managed in a way that preserves energy security and delivers lasting value for the public. That requires modernizing how we lease and oversee taxpayer-owned energy resources. One area I want to highlight today is the onshore oil and gas leasing system. Congress and the Department of Interior took overdue steps in 2022 to update oil and gas leasing, raising royalty rates from 12.5% to 16.67%, closing the non-competitive leasing loophole, and strengthening bonding so companies, not taxpayers, pay for cleanup. These safeguards did not deter industry interest. In fact, federal lease sales became more competitive, with higher participation and stronger bids. But many of these gains were repealed this year. Royalty rates were reduced to outdated levels, a fee discouraging speculative nominations was repealed, and the door to non-competitive leasing was reopened. Each of these changes shifts costs back to taxpayers. For decades, federal royalties lagged behind what states and private landowners require. Closing that gap ensures that federal taxpayers receive fair payment for resources we own. Had the more competitive rate of 16.67% been applied over the last decade, federal and state treasuries could have received $1.5 billion more per year. In states, this is valuable revenue directed towards public schools, roads, and other local priorities. During the years leasing rates were updated, competition actually increased. In 2024, BLM tripled the percentage of acres sold at auction compared to the previous decade. Average winning bids reached all-time highs in 2024, 5 times higher than the previous decade. Non-competitive leasing also cost taxpayers. Allowing parcels that drew no interest at auction to be claimed for a nominal fee rewards speculation, not production. Nevada is a prime example. Around 2,500 leases containing over 6 million acres have been issued non-competitively in the state since 2000, and 0 have entered production. Preparing lease sales costs taxpayers, and issuing leases that will never reach production lock up lands from other valuable uses. It deprives taxpayers of potential revenue. Value comes from competition, not volume. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge shows how pushing leasing in areas where industry isn't interested creates high costs for taxpayers. In 2017, Congress counted on nearly $1 billion in lease sale revenue. Instead, the first auction only raised a small fraction of that, and the second attracted no bidders at all. Betting on revenue that never materializes shifts the risk to taxpayers. Another risk comes when companies walk away from wells without cleaning them up. For years, required financial assurances were far too low to cover reclamation, forcing taxpayers to pick up the tab. Old wells leak methane, contaminate water, and endanger nearby communities. Weakening bonding protections only guarantees that future liabilities will be shouldered by taxpayers. Energy dominance also means not wasting our valuable resources. One example of waste is methane lost during oil and gas production. Between 2012 and 2021, 300 billion cubic feet of natural gas was wasted on federal lands. When this publicly owned resource doesn't reach the market, taxpayers and consumers lose. While my testimony focused on onshore oil and gas, the same principles, fair return, competition, preventing future liabilities, and avoiding waste apply across all forms of energy development. There are practical conservative measures that can be taken to ensure oil and gas development, grazing, mining, timber harvesting, and other resource development on federal lands and waters delivers lasting value for Americans. Together, we can protect taxpayer assets, ensure what is owed is collected, and prevent long-term costs from being shifted to the American public. That has been our mission for 3 decades: responsible stewardship of our natural resources and sound budgeting for the people who own them. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hanna. The chair now recognizes Mr. Myers for his 5 minutes.
Chairman Gosar, Ranking Member Dexter, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to testify today on behalf of the American Petroleum Institute and our members. This hearing comes at a defining moment. The United States is living through what can fairly be called the golden age of American energy dominance. In the span of just 2 decades, we have moved from a position of dependence to one of abundance and global leadership. For 50 years, presidents of both parties warned of the dangers of continued reliance on foreign energy. But that is not the America that we live in today. American ingenuity has completely flipped the script, and for the first time in a generation, we control our energy future. The scale of this transformation is striking. The United States is now the world's largest oil producer. We are the world's largest natural gas producer. We are a net energy exporter after having long been the world's largest importer. These are not abstract trends. They deliver benefits felt by every American household. They reflect a reliable supply of affordable energy for consumers and businesses, tangible geopolitical advantages abroad, and much-needed stability to markets long defined by volatility and dependence on foreign supply. The U.S. oil and gas industry supports more than 10 million American jobs and is built on a commitment to safety. These jobs are not just limited to rigs in Texas or refineries in Louisiana. They stretch across the supply chain into virtually every state and every congressional district. Collectively, the sector contributes nearly $1.8 trillion to the U.S. GDP, almost 8% of the entire economy, which we often call the first 8% because nothing in the economy works without energy. Oil and gas development on public lands and waters is an especially essential part of the American energy success story. These resources are among the crown jewels of the United States, and the value is not only measured in barrels of production, but in the revenues that flow directly back to the public. Our industry has always believed that the primary beneficiary of energy development on public lands and waters should be the American people. Oil and gas production from these areas has long been one of the largest revenue sources for the federal government. In 2024 alone, federal oil and gas leasing program generated over $14 billion in revenue, with revenues totaling more than $150 billion since 2015. That revenue funds schools, infrastructure, and public services across the country. A portion also supports conservation efforts, including the Land and Water Conservation Fund, the single largest source of conservation funding in the United States at $900 million a year, all of which comes directly from offshore oil and gas production. By passing the One Big Beautiful Bill, Congress has ushered in a new era of exploration and development on federal lands and waters, and the potential to generate an even stronger return for the American people. It's a renewed and much-needed signal that U.S. energy development is being encouraged rather than stymied. It marks a shift from an era of opposition to one of renewed confidence, sending a message to workers, investors, and allies that America intends to remain the global energy leader for generations to come. Yet we also know we are still merely scratching the surface. We have the resources, and we know the demand will be there. But increasingly, the question is whether we can connect the two. Can we build the pipelines, the refinery upgrades, the export facilities, and the infrastructure necessary to move the energy from where it is produced to where it is needed? That is the permitting challenge, and unfortunately, our permitting process is fundamentally broken. Today, projects stall for years in duplicative review or endless litigation. Projects that should take less than a year to permit can easily stretch to a decade or more. Absurd, but all too common delays like this don't just stall private investment. They delay lower energy costs for consumers, they delay federal revenues from royalties and lease sales, and delay the reliable energy that our allies count on. The need for fixing this broken system becomes more obvious by the day, and Congress must lead the way by passing comprehensive permitting reform. We must be able to meet the ever-growing demands of the future. As we say, when America builds, America wins. That is why this hearing is so important, and we commend the subcommittee for underscoring what's at stake, whether America's unmatched energy advantage will be fully realized or left stranded in the ground. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, API and our members stand ready to work with you to secure this future, one where American energy means American strength, American jobs, and American security. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Now we're going to go to questions, and I'll be recognizing members of the committee. We'll start with Ms. Boebert, the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. For 4 years, the Biden administration's restrictive energy policies crushed rural America, hiking costs and killing jobs by stifling domestic oil and gas production. Families faced soaring energy prices while economic growth stalled. But today is a new day in America. The American people gave us a mandate last November, empowering us here in Congress to ignite a golden age of American energy dominance. President Trump has been working since day one to slash regulations, streamline permitting, and championing fossil fuels, nuclear, and hydroelectric power. This bold strategy will unleash affordable energy, revitalize rural economies, create jobs, and strengthen national security, ensuring communities like those in my district in Colorado and certainly throughout the West can thrive. Commissioner Taylor, Garfield County in southern Utah is rich in natural resources, including potential for oil and gas, uranium, and renewables, yet faces federal overreach on land use. From your perspective, Mr. Commissioner, as a local leader, how has federal policy stifled economic development in Western America, certainly in your area, and what local sources, what local success stories illustrate the untapped potential of energy dominance?
Well, thank you for the question. I brought a stick today. My county is 3.3 million acres. This stick is 33 inches long. This shows you how much land we have in Garfield County. BLM, Forest Service, National Park Service, the state, and here we have the private, which is about 3%. As you can tell, we got the short end of the stick in Garfield County. Garfield County is, we have about 93% of all of our land is federal. We have the largest coal reserve in North America. It's not only the largest coal reserve, it's the cleanest, highest BTU, lowest sulfur coal there is in the world. But because somebody put a monument there, we can't touch it. We're ready to help. We want to be at the table. I have a saying that says, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. We've kind of felt like we've always been on the menu. And so we would love to help out. We have oil and gas. We do have uranium, and it's ready to go as soon as the prices come up a little bit. It's ready to go. We want to be part of the solution.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. And I would agree that America has some of the cleanest coal, but I think Colorado has the cleanest. You and I can have a debate.
We can debate.
Yeah, no, I thank you so much, and really seeing your presentation there with your land in Garfield County. I'm sure county commissioners like yourself appreciate the PILT program too, that we fight for each and every year, so you could get that fair value. And now, sorry, moving on, just because we've cut into a lot of our time here. Ms. Forgot?
Yes.
Okay, so I would like to ask you, what should the United States do about the EU corporate sustainability due diligence directive, and how does this impact American businesses today?
Well, it's going to impact American businesses when they're going to be required to file information about their emissions and the emissions of their contractors and the emissions of their subcontractors. And the Trump administration is already putting pressure on European countries, and they are starting to negotiate. But the White House should direct an interagency effort led by the Commerce Department and supported by the U.S. Trade Representative and the State Department to quantify the direct costs of these EU regulations. And the administration should list CSDDD in the USTR's annual National Trade Estimate Report, which lays out foreign barriers that U.S. companies face. And third, policymakers should pass legislation restricting U.S. companies from complying with CSDDD. They shouldn't be allowed to comply with this law, including by advancing the Protect USA Act, which would prohibit U.S. companies from complying with the EU regulation. And finally, the Trump administration should threaten to adjust defense spending in Europe down by the amount of the regulatory cost.
Thank you very much. And if we go around again, I'll ask some more questions of y'all, but thank you so much for that answer. I yield.
I think the gentlewoman from Arizona, Ms. Hansari, is recognized for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today. Americans are paying record prices at the pump while the United States is exporting more oil and gas than ever. That is not because we lack supply. It is because oil and gas companies are prioritizing profits over people. Instead of passing along the savings to families, these corporations are shipping oil overseas, driving up costs here at home, and lining the pockets of their executives. We need an energy policy that puts consumers first and communities first, not corporate greed. The same industry that forces families to pay more at the pump is also avoiding billions of dollars in costs for using our public lands by exploiting loopholes, special treatment, and weak enforcement, leaving taxpayers to foot the bill. We've heard today about the, quote, economic potential of the Trump administration's energy policies. I ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs to the Arizona congressional delegation regarding the Donald Trump Big Ugly Bill. As this letter lays out, Arizona faces $58 billion in lost investments and 69,000 lost jobs as a result of the disastrous energy policies in this bill. Donald Trump has launched a full-blown war on clean energy. He's working hand in hand with Big Oil. Of course, he directly asked for $1 billion in campaign contributions from them so that he could block renewables, kill American jobs, and keep families paying more at the pump and on their power bills. At a time when clean energy is creating record numbers of good-paying jobs, I've heard from labor unions across the state, including from conservatives who are part of these labor unions benefiting from these jobs, yet Trump is doing everything that he can to drag us backward, protecting corporate polluters and big oil CEOs while working families pay the price in Arizona and across the country. Ms. Fergot Roth, you are the director of the Center for Energy, Climate, and Environment at the Heritage Foundation, the chief architect of Project 2025. Given that the clean energy tax credit rollbacks in the Big Ugly Bill were straight out of the Project 2025 playbook, I wanted to ask you, do you believe that killing hundreds of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars of investments in clean energy is good for the economy and good for our country's clean energy future?
That's a great question, because a lot of people say that ending the subsidies for wind and solar is going to cost jobs. And yes, it will cost jobs in those subsidized industries, but this will mean more jobs in oil, natural gas, nuclear power. It means energy is going to be less expensive because the subsidies are weakening the electricity grid. This is going to result in more jobs for the American people as manufacturing is attracted back to the United States because of these lower costs. And having wind and solar, which all needs backup, is like having two cars in your garage. One you can drive at night, one you can drive during the day, because you have to have two systems, the natural gas backup plants for the wind and battery storage for the solar.
Thank
so
you.
It's much less expensive having
Reclaiming my
fossil
time,
fuels.
just want to get to that. While I appreciate your response, the evidence does not show that. First of all, the U.S. government has been giving oil subsidies to the oil and gas industry for over 50 years in this country. Oil and gas still gets record subsidies from our government. So to say that suddenly, because wind and solar were getting subsidies and now that won't be the case, to say that there will be more jobs in oil and gas and that will suddenly make up for this, that's not the case. In Arizona, for example, we want to invest in clean energy. These are good quality jobs that people, regardless of political affiliation, appreciate, and I think taking that away is going to be a job killer. And again, it's more so from conservatives that I have heard this in my state. I also want to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a report with the data from the Energy Innovation titled Economic Impacts of U.S. Senate One Big Beautiful Bill Act Energy Provisions. It's important to look at actual data and science when talking about these issues. According to this, thank you, according to this report, the energy provisions of the Big Ugly Bill alone will result in 760,000 jobs lost. That's what the evidence shows. Cost the U.S. $980 billion in GDP, and increase household energy costs, this one's important, by $170 annually. It will also decrease power generation capacity by 340 gigawatts. This doesn't seem like energy dominance or economic prosperity to me. No matter how you try to spin it, the fact of the matter is that this bill is a disaster for regular people and for our energy future, and simply a giveaway to big oil and gas companies that have, since Donald Trump was inaugurated, had record profits, just like every other industry that is benefiting from his presidency. Thank you.
We'll have a second round, so the lady sticks around. We'll have ample time. I now recognize the ranking member, Ms. Dexter, for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you once again. The American people, as we've talked about, own our federal lands and the natural resources, and I absolutely agree with you, Mr. Meyer, that they deserve to get the return on that investment and the development. But policies championed by my Republican colleagues and their president would monetize our public lands with a terrible outcome for taxpayers and a great outcome for oil and methane companies. We're already seeing that. We're certainly not collecting those royalties and negotiating competitive leases. We're giving them away so that oil companies can earn their fair share in their minds. Ms. Hanna, your testimony is a rather jarring summary of some of the ways we let big oil get away with not paying their fair share. And while they may make billions off our federal public lands, they're not getting effectively back to the people of the back to the American people the way that we must enforce or oversee. I want to ask about some of that. So on royalties, each year $3.9 billion of federal royalty money was dispersed to states, and each state determines how to use those funds. Your organization has discussed how royalties collected on federal lands deliver measurable benefits to American taxpayers, state governments, and communities near oil and gas operations. So my first question, with the reduction of royalty collections in the Big Ugly Law, what will be the impact on states that receive that money?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Dexter. The impact will be significant because royalties do provide a valuable revenue stream for states and local communities in addition to the federal treasury and all of us across the country. We've calculated, looking back at what we've left on the table, if you do a comparison at the 12.5% rate to the 16.67%, we're losing about $1.5 billion per year by having that lower rate. And the lower rate doesn't isn't in line with the market. We've seen states at much higher levels across the board. States like Texas charge 25%, Colorado 20%, most other states at 16.67, which we think was a modest increase. My organization has supported an 18.75% royalty. The 16.7 that we were operating these last several years we thought was modest and would bring valuable revenue to the states to fund those priorities that were mentioned in my testimony. You mentioned that schools, roads, infrastructure, that revenue is important for states.
Absolutely. And what do communities stand to lose? You just mentioned some of those. When they lose that revenue, where else do you see the biggest impact on states like Texas or Colorado?
So I think when we leave money on the table like this, then we're just shortchanging those communities for those valuable priorities. A lot of these funds in various states go to a general fund that then goes to pre-K programs, hospitals, roads. It depends on the state. But those tens of millions of dollars, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on the state, it's very valuable revenue and revenue that we all need right now.
Very much so. Are there federal royalty rates? Are the federal royalty rates historically similar to those charged on state and private lands?
So we haven't, so the federal rate, until 2 years, until 2022, we had not updated the federal royalty rate since it was enacted over a century ago. So that rate had lagged, that percentage. While states had increased for years, we'd seen rates at higher levels. Like I mentioned, the state of Texas, 25%, the state of Colorado, now 20%. New Mexico has recently raised rates 20% or above. So these rates, and private interest similarly, and so the federal government was just leaving money on the table by having an outdated royalty rate.
Okay, and I just want to make sure that I understand that. So we're cutting royalty rates, that's clearly leaving $1.5 billion on the table projected, but we're also not collecting the rates that we are legally mandated to do. So in your mind, where is the best policy for most effective recouping for the American people in the near term?
Yeah, so I think with royalties, we need to make sure that we have a competitive rate. So when we saw the repeal back down to the 12.5%, that's discouraging. Higher production could lead to a lot more revenue. So why would we reduce rates right now when we need that revenue? And I think we need to make sure that royalties are collected and we get the oil and gas program off the GAO high risk list so that we're getting taxpayers' fair share.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I'll save the rest for the next round.
Okay, we're going to do a second round. So now I'd like to talk about my legislation, H.R. 34, the LASSO Act. Okay, now the LASSO Act encourages energy development and mineral production on public lands while helping to save Social Security from going insolvent. Now Joe Biden wanted to lock up 30% of public lands by 2030. He was hoping to restrict economic activities on public lands. And Biden even tried adding natural asset companies on the New York Stock Exchange, for heaven's sake. In contrast, the LASSO Act helps put public lands where they belong, in the hands of the public. We're putting public lands back in the public hands. Now, by allocating 10% of all the revenues generated on public lands to the Social Security Trust Fund, the LASSO Act helps us one step closer to ensuring that America is energy independent, mineral dominant, while also ensuring that Social Security benefits are rightfully there for everyone who paid into it. In other words, it's a win-win situation. Now, Ms. Ferngoth Roth, I said it right this time, right? Okay. Yes or no, would you agree that keeping America's competitive edge over China and Russia is very important?
It's absolutely vital to keep the competitive edge over China. We don't want to have China be in a position where it can cut off our energy supply and transportation supply if we have electric vehicles in the case of a conflict over Taiwan or some other conflict, just the way Russia cut off the natural gas to Europe.
Right. Well, Russia has, for example, a national wealth fund that funds infrastructure projects and budget shortfalls with oil and gas revenues. It's even been a tool in financing Russia's war effort in the Ukraine, just like the sovereign wealth funds in Montana, Wyoming, and Alaska, just to name a few of them in the state. Does the U.S. risk falling behind our adversaries by not fully utilizing its natural resources well to fund domestic expenses?
It's very important to use our natural resources. We don't need a sovereign wealth fund. We are so wealthy that we don't need one. We can have our companies make investments themselves. We can have the American people make investments themselves. And it's actually not true that oil and gas have major subsidies in the tax code. They don't have any subsidies, major subsidies that are not similar to other manufacturing in the United States. They used to, but they no longer do. Whereas in the Inflation Reduction Act, there are about $1 trillion worth of subsidies for clean energy, all of which weakened the electricity grid because there was more wind, more solar, without the adequate backup of what's called dispatchable continuous fuels, natural gas, coal, and nuclear power.
Gotcha. Now, I talked about my lasso act earlier. Would tying natural resources to the Social Security Trust Fund promote multiple use and help us compete with our adversaries?
It's very important to have strong economic growth to put the Social Security Trust Fund back in balance, and investment in natural resources, use of our own domestic resources will be very, very helpful in that. So thank you so much for that.
Gotcha. Mr. Taylor, now for you. The public land estate covers an extensive portion of the West. I'm from a group in Wyoming, and I now live in Arizona. Under the multiple-use doctrine, this public land creates opportunities for mining, grazing, recreation, and oil and gas development, as well as others. But it can be a burden when federal land sits vacant. I represent a district primarily composed of public land. So as you'll notice here, here's Mojave County. 71% of Mojave County, for example, is public land. Now, you said earlier that Garfield County was 90% federal government. 93, right?
Somewhere between 90 and 93%.
Wow. Now, what type of revenue does this federal land generate?
About 34 cents an acre.
Now, on the flip side, when the federal government is unused, can you tax it or receive PILT?
We receive PILT at 34 cents an acre.
So, but that's pennies on the dollar to what we were promised, right?
Yes.
How about secure rural schools?
Well, you tell me. How is secure rural schools? We started out with secure rural schools of collecting a little over $1 million a year. We received 41,000 this year.
Yeah. So your county actually benefits when the land's being used and generates revenue, right?
Absolutely.
Now, this is why my lasso act is so critical. By putting public lands back in the hands of the public, we're turning the federal state into a tangible asset for them. Americans will look at this as an investment portfolio and say, we have all this land that can be developed. Let's mine, graze, drill, because it strengthens my Social Security benefits. We want to empower people. I'd rather do that than some bureaucrat. Maybe, just maybe, common sense will prevail. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to our second round, and the gentle lady from Colorado, Ms. Robert, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll see. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Meyer, API's recent statements on COP28 and carbon capture underscore the industry's commitment to sustainability. How do these technologies, combined with expanded drilling on federal lands, position America to lead globally in energy exports and reduce trade deficits, therefore by boosting our economy in this golden age?
Thank you, Congresswoman. That's a great question. I'm glad that you asked it. When you think about the future of energy technologies, there's so many that the industry is investing in, not just the technologies of today, but the technologies of tomorrow as well. Carbon capture is absolutely at the leading edge of that, and our industry is very proud to be leading the world in investment in those technologies. I think really it's a question as to where those technologies will be developed. Will it be here in the United States? Or will it be elsewhere around the world? We want to make sure that they're developed here, and we want to make sure we have a policy framework that allows that. You're right that as we've become a net energy exporter, that's delivered enormous benefits, not just to the American people in terms of the economic and job creation here in domestic markets, but has directly reduced our trade deficit with importing countries all around the world. We are by far the world's largest LNG exporter. It wasn't that long ago that we were expected to be the world's largest LNG importer. So that's a huge step and a big transformation.
Yes, and I know in our natural resources full hearing tomorrow, we're going to be talking more about energy permitting reform, and I'm sure that that will be beneficial. Are there any explicit permit reforms that you would like to see?
Absolutely. We have a long list. In fact,
Yes.
just today, we released a campaign for our permitting reform. We really think that that's the next step and needs to be the next big legislative priority for this Congress is comprehensive permitting reform. We're moving into a chapter of our country's history in which we have to be able to build big things, and we can't do it because the process is so fundamentally broken. That doesn't just impact our industry, that impacts every single sector of the economy. So I think now is the time to really fix that permitting process and make sure that we can meet the demands of the future. Reforming the NEPA provisions is very important. Reforming the Clean Water Act is very important. None of this is to suggest that there should not be an environmental review process and that it shouldn't be thorough and comprehensive. We all agree on that. The question is just, do we have the predictability and the transparency that actually allows project developers of all sorts to build the projects that the American people expect them to be able to build? That's really the vision for our permitting campaign. It's why we call it When America Builds, America Wins.
I love it. And also, you know, America, we need to lead in the race for AI. And we certainly need energy to do that. And so I think that that would be a huge step in this as well. We have a couple minutes left. I'm going to go back to Ms. Fergo-Roth. Do you believe that the Biden administration's energy policies contributed to inflation and energy poverty? And what role could streamline permitting play in reversing these trends to foster a new era of prosperity?
You can definitely see that, yes, the more renewable energy a state has, the higher its electricity prices. If you look at the top 10 states in terms of residential electricity prices, 9 out of the 10 require renewables. The bottom 10 in terms of low electricity prices, 9 out of 10 do not require renewables. Bottom is Utah, Louisiana, around 11 cents per kilowatt hour. Top in the lower 48 is California at about 32 cents per kilowatt hour. These are 2024 numbers. So you can see the more renewables, and that's because you have to have two systems. It's as though I said to you, I'm going to give you a car, but you can only drive it during the day. And you might say to me, but I need another one at night. And I say, too bad. You can only drive this free car during the day. Wind and solar are free, but they need backups, and they need connection to the transmission grid, so they're inherently more expensive. And you can also see around the world, Germany, the UK, that require renewables. Their residential electricity rates around 37, 39 cents per kilowatt hour. In the United States, we have an average of 18. China, Russia, OPEC, it's less than 1 cent a kilowatt hour. So yes, the incentives for renewables definitely made electricity more expensive for the average American. That slows the economy, that creates energy poverty.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. My time has expired, and I want to thank you all for coming to DC, and I yield.
Thank the gentlelady from Colorado. And the gentlelady, the ranking member, Ms. Dexter, is recognized for her 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. I want to try to go through a few things here relatively quickly. I wanted to start with venting and flaring. And I think oil and methane companies should pay for the methane they pull out of the ground, even if they decide not to use it. But the Trump administration seems to think that if they decide they don't want the methane, they can just throw it away without paying for it. So, Ms. Hanna, I wanted to start with you. How much does that lost methane cost American taxpayers?
So taxpayers lose on lost methane that doesn't get to market in several ways. And one of the first ways is that that gas doesn't get to market and we don't get royalty revenue on it, right? So we're not charged an assessed royalty. That gas is wasted. Consumers don't get to use it. And we're not assessing royalties in almost every case. And so that's costing us tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars added up over the years to billions of dollars on wasted methane. We're also losing because we're paying for increased climate liabilities and pollution liabilities, right? We're endangering communities. Methane poses risks for water, public safety. You know, these leaks and flares, climate is a real liability for taxpayers and costing us in many ways. And so that methane not getting to market, not being captured, costs us that way. And then we recently were, there was a methane fee that was instituted for methane that was released or vented or flared over a certain threshold. We thought that was a very modest fee. That was $7 billion that we could have had in new revenue. That was pulled back in the 25 budget reconciliation bill just this summer. So that's another concern for us. A lot of money left on the table for that excess waste that's going to cost us in many ways.
Absolutely, and I would be remiss as a physician if I didn't also mention that venting and flaring costs about $7.4 billion in health damages. In addition to all of that, 710 premature deaths, 73,000 asthma exacerbations among children annually, according to a 2024 study out of Boston University that, without objection, I'd like to put into the record. Thank you. So now I want to go to bonding. When oil and methane companies are finished with extraction from our lands, they're supposed to put bonds to cover cleanup costs for their wells. You've spoken to that also, Ms. Hanna. Are there bonds ensuring the oil companies' toxic messes are being cleaned up when they are done using our lands? And if so or not, how much does that cost taxpayers?
So taxpayers are losing on outdated bonds, lost for years, and only recently did the Department of Interior take steps to update bonding rates for oil and gas operations on federal lands. Those rates hadn't been updated since the 1950s and were woefully inadequate to covering the real costs of reclamation. We've estimated that there's probably about $6 billion conservatively of still left out there for taxpayers to address for abandoned wells, and these wells do need reclaimed. But going forward, we need to make sure that we have adequate financial assurances so that taxpayers aren't left picking up these costs. We need to make sure that we maintain the bonding rates that we have now set at the Department of Interior, and that they're kept modernized. We can't go back to those old rates or insufficient coverage, or else we will be again left with these shortfalls and taxpayers covering those costs.
Absolutely, thank you. I want to transition to Mr. Meyer and the discussion about carbon capture and sequestration. It's the practice of injecting into the ground large amounts of carbon dioxide, often from power plants or other facilities that generate large amounts of carbon dioxide. The intent is to catch it before it gets into the air so it doesn't contribute to climate crisis. And API has a history of supporting carbon capture and sequestration. Does API still support that investment and opportunity?
Yes, ma'am, we do.
Thank you. So does that mean that API believes that carbon dioxide causes climate change?
Yes, we believe climate change is real.
I love that you follow the science more closely than hopefully. Anyway, I love that you're following the science. I'll leave it there. I want to go back to climate now, to Ms. Hanna. Do you agree that climate-driven disasters pose a significant financial risk to taxpayers?
Absolutely. We're seeing more frequent, more intense weather-related events from climate change, and taxpayers cover those costs.
And isn't it also true that taxpayers fund disaster recovery after severe weather events?
Yes, and those costs are on the rise. We had a comprehensive report looking at this, paying the price just a few years back, about how those disaster costs are exponentially increasing due to climate change, and taxpayers are footing that bill.
Feels like a loss on all ends for our taxpayers. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Yeah. Ms. Hanna, cost of a house in 1900 is the same cost as it is today, right?
I'm sorry.
Yes or no?
The cost of
A house,
a house?
the average house?
Absolutely not, no.
Yeah. So, and everything's more expensive today than it was in 1900, right?
Yes.
So any event, any kind of a bad weather will cause problems of each magnitude. I mean, I have a house outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. Once upon a time, I built it for about $150,000, but I put all my sweat equity into it, and now it's worth over supposedly $1.4 million. So if I were to have a natural disaster like a wildfire, for God's sake, that's going to add up there. So you also have to look at rocks. Rocks tell you a lot about the history of the earth, okay? You know, there were things like called dinosaurs that ran around on the earth, okay? And one of those minerals that I was going to talk about was antimony, okay? We found some between Wickenburg and Prescott, okay? And what they said is that they think it's a supernova that died, it collapsed on itself and became a meteor, okay? And it crashed there. So we need antimony for hardening of metals, okay, for military. Now, I'm a believer we need all the above. And Mr. Myers, I want to give you a chance to respond to the ranking member's comments about flaring, if you got some.
Sorry, the ranking member's comments about what?
Flaring with methane.
Right. So thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. We completely agree on the need to reduce methane emissions, both because it's the right thing to do, but also because, as you suggested, it's the product that we sell. We're very pleased with the amount of progress that we've made as an industry over the last 15 years. The methane emissions intensity of U.S. oil and gas operations over the last 15 years has declined by 61%. So we're very pleased about the progress that we've made. We know that there's more work to do, but we're very excited about the path ahead because we understand the importance of this issue.
So once again, you're listening to the science, which is also technology, right? So new technology is breeding new ideas.
Absolutely. There's a lot of momentum in this space right now. There's a lot of innovation. We're getting better and better at tracking our operations and know where these emissions are generating from and how to stop them as quickly as possible. That's one of the top priorities of the industry and has been for at least 15 years.
So now, going back to Mr. Meyer with my LASSO Act, would not this be some way to actually restrict some of the radical environmental aspects in regards to mitigating that with your common folk, because now it belongs to the people and they're getting a benefit from this? So wouldn't that kind of help restrict it or make sure good neighbor policy is around?
Sorry, I'm having a hard time understanding the question.
Okay, so
would there be benefits to reducing the amount of emissions to the American people?
well, no, I'm saying that all the emissions and then land use, all those things. Because you're taking a resource that now you're gonna get $2 to $4 billion per year off of. Then you're gonna see that Social Security Fund was supposed to go insolvent in about 5 or 7 to 9 years maybe, okay? They're gonna look at that and say, listen, we can do a lot better with this. Because we can have all the above, which is what I believe. I want to empower them so they can use that asset wisely. So maybe the permitting process, like Mr. Taylor was talking about, like you were talking about, will actually come down, because what happens is we have all commonly are involved in that aspect, and we're sharing the resource. So we have mutual interest. And when people have mutual interest, they don't want to desecrate a resource, right?
Yep, I agree, and I think that reiterates the importance of having permitting reform to make sure that these resources can be developed, and especially when you're talking about resources on federal lands and waters, you're talking about resources that are development to the betterment of the American people, so absolutely.
Okay, so I only have 54 seconds left. So I'm going to ask you each to respond to this question. What was the question you wanted asked that wasn't asked, and what is the answer? I'm notorious for this one. We'll start with you, Mr. Furbach.
I would have liked to be asked whether carbon capture was a worthwhile use of resources, and I would have answered that no, it isn't, because recent updated science has shown that greenhouse gas emissions have less effect on warming than we thought, and it's tremendously expensive to insert carbon down in the earth and keep it.
Mr. Taylor, what was the question that you wanted to ask that wasn't asked, and what's the answer?
Well, how counties could be more involved within this process, how we could become partners with the federal government and the decisions that they're making within our counties. My answer would be, we need to be at the table with you.
It's called federalism. Yes. Ms. Hannah, what was the question that you wanted to ask, wasn't asked, and what's its answer?
I would have liked to have been asked how American taxpayers can benefit from the strong energy position we are currently in, and I would have answered that, you know, if we have market rates, competition, and rigorous strategic leasing policies, we can bring in a lot of revenue for American taxpayers right now, and we can also reduce costly liabilities by having strong protections for taxpayers for cleanup and bonding, and address the increasing liabilities that we see from energy production.
Mr. Meyer?
I think it would have been, what are the policies that we need to put in place today to ensure that in 2035 or 2040, we don't find ourselves back in the position of dependence that we were in 2005 or from generations before that. And I think the answer would be a lot of the policies that were included in the reconciliation bill, a lot of the regulatory actions that the administration is taking, but maybe most relevant to this conversation is the need for truly comprehensive permitting reform to really cement American energy leadership.
Well, I gotta tell you, you're so right. You loved all your questions there. I'm just gonna leave you with one comment. I think the technology is going to be very, very important. For us out west, Mr. Taylor, water is also life. And so I'd like to see us really dig at technology. One of those is Schlumberger, believe it or not. Remember the seismic group? Now they're working with lithium, which is another component for batteries for green energy, right? Well, now what they're doing is they're actually use a lot of water, but they can go into these subsurface aquifers that have heavy contamination, and they can actually utilize that by utilizing it to get concentrated lithium, and then they get clean water. So a lot of this is going to be in the hands of the public, but it's also technology. Now, I thank the witnesses for their testimony, their valuable testimony, and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions. I'll guarantee you we will, for the witnesses, and we'll ask that you respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. on Friday, September 12th. Hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there's no further business, okay, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.
You already accepted this one.
Thank you.